Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm John. I am the event coordinator at Murder by the Book, and I'm so excited to have these two authors with us. Yeah, it is sad that we're not able to do like actual book tours. The last event we had in store was Deanna Rayburn on like March 15th. So for us to go 7 months without actually having authors in the store is it's unheard of and it's crazy. But one of the upsides is that we're able to do things virtually, so we're not limited by geography. And one of the upsides is this is actually the second time that we've gotten to chat with both Lisa and Ruth. So if you want more of them after this chat, you can check out the store's YouTube channel. Lisa chatted with Adele Parks a little earlier this year, and we had a really great conversation with Ruth Ware and Sophie Hannah about Golden Age mysteries, and those are all available to watch on the store's YouTube channel. This chat, if you guys miss any part of it, if you have to duck away, once it is done in the next day or two, we'll get it uploaded to the store's YouTube channel as a private video for you guys to view for a couple of weeks before we make it public for everyone. Wanted to mention before I get them introduced and started so I don't forget, we are here to talk about Lisa's new book, Invisible Girl, which just came out Tuesday. We have signed copies of it available at the store. Most of you, if you were joining the event, have already ordered a copy from us. But if you need another one for a friend, if you just got a ticket and you need a book, we have plenty of copies. And we also have copies of One by One by Ruth Ware, which just came out recently, and we still have some signed book plates to go along with those. So we'll get right into it. We're so excited to have Ruth Ware here with us to chat. She worked as a waitress, a bookseller, a teacher of English as a foreign language, and a press officer before settling down as a full-time writer. She now lives with her family in Sussex on the south coast of England. She is the #1 New York Times and Globe Mail Toronto bestselling author of In a Dark, Dark Wood, The Woman in Cabin 10, The Lying Game, The Death of Miss Westaway, The Turn of the Key, and One by One. How are you today, Ruth?
Well, I am slightly under the weather today. So if you see me mute my microphone and turn away, it's not because I'm being sick, it's because I'm trying to cough quietly off mic. So, but I have my hot toddy here and my cough sweet, so I'll get through.
Perfect. And so Ruth is going to be chatting with Lisa Jewell about Lisa's new book, Invisible Girl. Lisa Jewell is the internationally best-selling author of 18 novels, including the New York Times bestsellers, The Family Upstairs, and Then She Was Gone, as well as Watching You and I Found You. Her novels have sold more than 4.5 million copies across the English-speaking world, and her work has also been translated into 25 languages. How are you today, Lisa?
Yes, I think I'm all right. I'm feeling slightly under the weather, but I'm hoping that the adrenaline rush of a lovely bookshop event with and talking to Ruth
Instead of book called Invisible Girl, that's what they said.
Will pull me through that.
Awesome. I wanted to say we're so excited about this event. You know, everybody at the store reads kind of widely different stuff, but there are some authors that everybody at the store reads. Lisa Jewell and Ruth Ware are both of those authors, to the point where when their advanced reader copies come in, there's a lot of negotiation that happens in the store of who has the next day off and can inhale it while they're off, who has seniority and can get it first, who reads digitally and can read digitally so the physical copy can go home with somebody else. So there's always a whole lot of who gets the new Lisa Jewell or who gets the new Ruth Ware first. So we're excited to be able to have both of you here to chat. If you guys have questions for either author, you can leave those in the chat, and I'm going to pop away and let the two of you get into it, and I will see you in a little bit with some crowd questions.
Hi, John.
Well, Lisa's so excited to be chatting with you about Invisible Girl. And normally I'm always thinking, you know, how sad it is that we can't really be together in person and on tour. But given we're both coughing and croaking, I should think everybody watching this is probably just pathetically grateful that they're not in the same room with us.
Yes, yeah, I was just thinking that. Yes, even in normal times, we probably wouldn't be. We'd be keeping our distance right now.
Absolutely. I do feel obliged to say, I know I can't infect anybody over Wi-Fi, but I have had a COVID test and it's not COVID. So don't worry, I'm not coughing my way into it. It's just the normal autumn lurgy that all the kids get going back to school.
Yes.
But I loved Invisible Girl. I actually listened to it on audiobook, where it has different actors doing the narrators, which added so much to it. It was absolutely brilliant. But I wondered if you could start by telling us, it's quite a complicated novel to sum up without giving any spoilers. So
thank you for
over to you.
Yes, thank you, Ruth. I do appreciate it. Yeah, it's just, I always have such trouble trying to explain what my books are about in a sort of really nice, neat little package. And I always end up just rambling on for ages and ages and ages, and people probably stop listening halfway through. So I'm going to try and be really perky and brief about this. But yes, so Invisible Girl, it's about 3 people. So it's about Owen Pick, who is 33 years old. He is a bit of a loner. He's a bit odd. He lives with his aunt in her spare bedroom. He sleeps on a single bed. His aunt hates him and doesn't let her. She keeps all the rooms in her flat locked so that he can't go into any of the rooms. And he is also a virgin. And so we meet Owen at the beginning of the book, having just been suspended from his job as a college lecturer because 2 of the girls of his students have complained about him sexual misconduct at the Christmas party. So he lives in this really upmarket neighbourhood in North London called Hampstead with his aunt. And in this community, he's kind of known as being a bit of a weirdo. People keep their distance from him because he's just got a strange aura around him. And opposite Owen is a family called the Fors family. There's Kate and Rowan. Kate is a physiotherapist. Rowan is a child psychologist. And they have 2 teenage children called Joshua and Georgia. And Kate's very suspicious of Owen across the street because Georgia said that Owen followed her home from the tube station one night. So when there's a series of sex attacks reported in the local area, Kate very much suspects that Owen might have something to do with it and actually reports him to the police. Bit of a busybody. And then the third character is a character called Sapphire Maddox, who's 17 years old, and she's the eponymous Invisible Girl. And she was once a patient of Rowan's. She went to him for therapy because something happened to her when she was a child. Something traumatic happened to her, and she began self-harming and was sent to see Rowan for therapy. He finishes their therapy sessions declaring that she's cured. She does not agree that she's been cured and takes to following Rowan around, and hence Invisible Girl, and learns all sorts of secrets about Rowan. So when she goes missing on Valentine, I told you there was no short way of explaining this.
This is why I let you do it.
Yeah, nobody needs to bother read it now. So when Sapphire goes missing on Valentine's night from outside Rowan's house, and the last person to see her alive is Owen Pick, the spotlight of suspicion falls very firmly upon Owen, and he is taken into custody. And I will stop there because otherwise there really will be no point in anybody reading the book. But yes, that is.
No, you did it perfectly. There weren't any spoilers. That was a really good. There's a lot left to come out over the course of the novel. Enough to say. You sort of touched briefly on this, but it's not just about the 3 characters you described. It's narrated by them, isn't it? There's 3 completely separate narrators. I'm always in awe of authors who write multiple narrators. I tried to do it for the first time in One by One, in
which you have about 9 narrators.
Well, there's 2. There's lots of characters.
There's lots of characters, but there's 2 narrators. That's it, yes.
But I've always been slightly scared of it, and it's something that you seem to do really effortlessly. And I wondered. Well, it's sort of a 2-part question, really. How do you go about that? How do you go about finding the voice of those narrators, making them sure they sound different? Why do you often choose to tell your books with multiple narrators? And when you start to sit down and write a book, are all the narrators there at the beginning? Do you find your way into the characters? How does it all work?
Yeah, but there's usually the one person. There's the one person who I have decided I would like to write about, because that's how I tend to start. That seems to be the starting point for most of my books, is somebody I'd like to inhabit for 300 pages. And in this case, it was Owen. So for a long time before I sat down to start writing the book, I knew it was going to be about Owen. And I gave the book the working title Creep, which I knew was going to be a working title. I knew I'd have to change it. So I kind of had him set in my head, and I knew he'd have just lost his job, and I knew where he might be heading in this sort of mental anguish that he was in at the beginning of the book. And then I kind of knew that I needed someone as a sort of the counterpoint to Owen. Someone needed to see him as the creep. So I just snatched out of thin air, oh, Kate, a woman, I saw her, she was quite slight. She wears a lot of pale pink. And she worries about her children too much, and just put her in the house opposite him. So she came quite late in the day. And then I actually thought it was going to be a two-hander. I thought it'll just be Owen and Kate, and that will be the dynamic, and there'll be these sex attacks in the local area. She'll suspect him for whatever reason, and that's going to be the story. But then, yeah, Sapphire arrived really late in the day. I just mentioned her in passing as an ex-patient of Rowan's, and I gave her this name, and I gave her this like hint of a backstory, and immediately I was just thought I really, really would love to write about this character who I've just sort of plucked out of thin air. I loved her name because the name just landed on the page from nowhere, Sapphire Maddox. And I loved the hint of a backstory that I'd supplied her with. And then so she joined the cast. So yes, to answer your question, no, I don't have the group in my head when I start writing a book. They kind of turn up when I need them. So in my last book, Family Upstairs, I kind of didn't realise I was going to do a backstory until I realised I needed to do a backstory. And once I realised I needed to do a backstory, I knew I needed a character to be the backstory narrator. And then Henry appeared, who was quite a colourful character as well. So yes, it's just normally one person, and then other people kind of arrive just in the nick of time.
I'm so glad you included Sapphire, because I had an awful lot of sympathy for all of the characters and all of the narrators, which I kind of sense that as an author you did too. But Sapphire was definitely my favourite, and I felt, without giving anything away, the narratives all kind of converge on this one point, which is the point where you're going to find out what actually happened, and Sapphire's narrative is crucial to that. And the other narratives sort of happen around and after the event that it's sort of leading towards. And I wondered if that was structurally difficult to figure out. Did you have to sort of sit down and work out who knew what and what information you were going to kind of, or was that just, did you just do it on the fly?
Yeah, I just did it. I absolutely did it on the fly. So I set Owen up in this situation, then I set Kate and her family up to suspect him of being a bad un. And then Sapphire arrived, and I thought, wow, it would really ramp up the tension here if, as well as all these sex attacks, if someone disappeared, and if it was someone who had a connection to one of my other characters, all the better. But for most of the book, it's set up, I think, about halfway through the book that Sapphire goes missing from outside Rowan's house on Valentine's night, which I decided would happen because it would be an exciting thing to happen. But I had no idea where she'd gone.
Oh really? So you didn't?
I had no idea. I didn't know she was dead or alive. I had no idea. I just know that she was outside Rowan's house at midnight on Valentine's night, and then she wasn't.
Something
had happened, and I did not know what had happened. And then it's just a matter of sort of, because are you a planner? Oh, we must have had this conversation. So we've done so many events together, Ruth and I.
I feel like we must have discussed. I'm not really a planner. I know the ending. I don't think I have the courage to go into it without knowing. Like, I wouldn't need to know exactly what happened, but I would need to know the outcome and who survived. And
okay. I'm sorry. I'm just going to go off on a bit of a tangent here, because I read Ruth's book One by One earlier this year, and it's one of the most extraordinary books I've ever read. It's so different and fresh and mind-blowing. But so, did you know did you know how?
I knew who did it and why. Yeah.
But did you know the thing with the ski lift and the chair lift and the?
Yeah, I knew all of that at the beginning. Wow. Because I think I probably write more traditional whodunits than you do. I think yours
Yes.
are more an exploration of character, and I feel like with a very small push they could be classified as just straight up literary novels, whereas I think mine are more sort of more Agatha Christie-esque whodunit.
Yes.
And I
was going to say, I think in our dotage, as we become lovely old female writers of great stature,
in our rocking chairs,
that you will be the Agatha Christie and maybe I will be the Ruth Rendell. What do you reckon?
that would be perfect.
For the new millennium. There you go.
Let's do it. We'll have that in mind as our target for 2050. We want to be back here at Murder by the Book.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. I'm
taking it.
I really think I would like to just ask you, turn the book on you and ask you to just tell everybody quickly and succinctly and really, really slickly what One by One is. Because
okay. I wasn't expecting to have to do this.
No, I won't badger you for any.
No, don't worry. It's really so I'll keep it really quick. It's about a company that goes on a corporate retreat to this like super luxe chalet in the middle of the French Alps in this très exclusive resort, and it's narrated for the first time by two people, which is why I'm so fascinated by how effortlessly Lisa does it, because for me that was kind of a real leap of confidence to say I'm gonna have two narrators, and one of the narrators is the chalet girl of the chalet, and so she's like the hostess, she's making sure everybody's comfortable. And the other narrator is the former secretary of the company who's taken over this chalet. And you discover that the reason they've taken it over is because they're threshing out this huge corporate buyout, and they're completely split. So half the company wants to accept it, half wants to reject it. And Liz, my second narrator, has the casting vote. So she's under enormous pressure from both sides. And then people start disappearing in the snow because it's a crime novel, and what would a crime novel be without the bodies piling up?
Yes, it is a real bodies piling up book, but for me what the incredible thing about it was the setting. How did you create that? It was so convincing. I was there in this cutting edge ski chalet and everything was absolutely the most luxurious finishes to everything, and the lighting and the ambience and everything was just so 5-star plus. Had you stayed in a chalet like that?
I mean, I ski. I love skiing.
Right.
And one of my favourite resorts to ski in is Val d'Isère, which is very high end and entirely peopled with, people like the characters in the book, very, very wealthy people. So no, I've never stayed in a chalet quite as luxe as the one in One by One, but I've definitely kind of, peered through the windows and imagined what it would be like to have that kind of lifestyle. So.
And just another question I've been dying to ask you is, you talk about the business side of it. So number one, it's like a hipster startup kind of. It's an app, isn't it? It's a music app.
It's like a music streaming app that allows you to.
You talk about this app as if it's real, and I was totally convinced that this could be. You sound like an expert. You sound like someone who's run a startup.
Good.
How do you do that? Is that a research thing?
Yeah, I did. Well, I'm going to turn this back to you in a second, actually, because my next question is sort of right back at you with something similar. But I read a lot of books about startup companies. And I kind of thought I should have put them in the acknowledgements, but I didn't, because my company is so toxic and horrible that I didn't want to make it appear as if it was based on a real company. I felt very much like it's not any of the books that I read. And there's a brilliant podcast called Startup, which is done by the founder of Gimlet Media, who does loads of startups on Spotify, loads of podcasts on Spotify, and he's brilliant, and he talks about the pressures of going from like a tiny little kernel of a company with a great idea to suddenly running this multi-person business where you have to be a great CEO and a great leader and look after your staff. And I was just fascinated by, like, he obviously really cares about that side of it and has taken enormous pains to become a really good boss. But it got me thinking about what would happen in a company where the CEO had no interest in making that leap, where he just stayed in the comfort zone of being a dude with a cool idea and a lot of money and just didn't really give a toss about anybody else. So that was, it was kind of my exploring the flip side.
Right.
Of the coin. But
it was
get
so
it back to Invisible Girl, I'm going to make you talk now. So this kind of ties into what I was going to ask you, because one feature of the narrators, which I was just in awe of, is that two of them, not that Kate is similar to you, but she has, I guess, like, she's a London mum. She's like, she's on paper, she's kind of, you have more in common with her than with the other two narrators. The other two are really different. One is a mixed race teenage girl, that's Sapphire. And the other, who's the person I was most fascinated by, is Owen, he's not an incel, but he is kind of incel adjacent. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about because it was so convincing, like your evocation of that world, and it made me wonder, did you have to do a lot of research, and what was that like? Maybe you could just talk a bit about what incels are for anybody who doesn't know.
Which I found so it's one of those things. I was really surprised when I first started talking about this book. I think particularly because the first person I spoke to was a journalist, and I just assumed, well, a journalist would be bound to, have an understanding of the incel community, and she'd never heard of it before. And I thought, oh, whoa, gosh, maybe I've gone a bit niche here.
Like if you're a woman who spends a lot of time on the internet, it's very hard to avoid. But
this is what I would have thought, but it turns out that fewer people know what an incel is than do know what an incel is. So incel is an abbreviated term for men who identify as involuntary celibates, which is so it's men who on one hand you could say they're unlucky in love, on the other hand you could say that society has thwarted them, that they hate women because women hate them. It's an ideology, it's a really dark, tawdry, violent, misogynistic ideology that exists mainly online. I don't think much happens in the real world. And men
gather off that they don't have a girlfriend, and they feel that's society's fault in a way.
It's society's fault, and there is a school of thought within this community that society should provide them with women, that there should be some way of making sure that every man gets a woman to sleep with. And there have been acts of terrorism carried out by men who identify as incels. There was a famous one who's like legendary in the world of the incel community. I cannot remember his name, and he turned up at a sorority somewhere in America with a gun, and he was going to kill girls, beautiful young girls. And some guys got between him and the door of the sorority and didn't let him into the sorority, and so he killed the guys instead. And he's seen as a hero, he's a legend. There's rape fantasies, there's all sorts of horrible, ugly things that go on in these rooms. To which end, I'm delighted to say I didn't do much research. It was already there. I'd read the article called The Rage of the Incels that was going viral a couple of years ago, and I wish I could remember the name of the journalist. I think her name was Gia or Tia. I'm really sorry if the journalist who wrote this amazing piece, who did all the hard, dirty work of going into the forums and reporting back on what she found in there. So I read that with my jaw hanging open. And then there was also a documentary on Netflix last year that was quite widely watched as well, in which they interviewed face-to-face with incels. And actually that was really reassuring, because I watched that halfway through writing the book, and there was a soft, they interviewed this guy on this documentary who was soft incel, because I wasn't sure where I was going with Owen on this journey that I was taking him on into the incel community. I didn't know if men like him existed in those forums. So that was quite reassuring to see this guy being interviewed who had a soft side to him. So it was already there. I'd already read about it. I was already fascinated by it and appalled and shocked by it. And because what I'd always wanted to do with Owen was see how far he would go with all this pent up frustration and bitterness and resentment of the world. And so I just thought, what will happen? And I didn't know what was going to happen, and I won't say too much because I don't want to spoil the book. I didn't know. I'm going to put him in touch with a guy, a really charismatic guy, who attempts to radicalize him from one of these forums. He meets him online, and they meet in real life. And this guy wants to radicalize Owen, and I just thought So I didn't do much research, but it is, even without that, it's pretty intense on the page. It's pretty unpleasant.
I'm so glad I had images of you sort of hanging around on incel forums under like a fake name or something.
No, I couldn't. I mean, I could, because I've got a really strong stomach. I do actually have a really strong stomach for all sorts of hideous things.
If you'd had to,
so I probably
you would have done it.
But I didn't feel like, if I'd had to, if it hadn't already been, somebody else hadn't already done it and made that available to me, I would have done it. But I'm glad.
Well, without giving any spoilers, Owen's character is brilliant, because although you set him on a really dark path, you never lose sight of his humanity. And you do, as a reader, you feel really fearful about where this is going to go, not just because of what you worry Owen is going to do to potentially the other characters, but I felt really worried for him. I felt really kind of maternal and sort of like, he just needs a break. He needs that is the correct response. That's very much how I felt about him while I was writing him. I felt very maternal. His mother died when he was 18, and they were quite close. And no one has loved him since then. And he's 33 when we meet him in the book. So he's been 15 years without love of any description. And he is, as I say, he is on the verge of becoming hardened. And I wasn't sure where I was going to go with that. And it was a really, really hard, I had to make really hard choices about him, because I felt so protective of him, and I just wanted the best for him. I didn't want him to do anything awful, and I didn't want him to hurt anyone or get into trouble. And so, that's exactly. But you're a writer, so you hardened your heart.
Yes. Well, I just did what I felt I needed to do, and it's really hard to talk about without.
It was very stressful to read, so I can only imagine how stressful it was to write. The bit that I kept, I did, because lots of bad things happen to lots of characters in the book, but the detail that really got to me with Owen was, as Lisa was said at the beginning, he lives in this flat with his aunt, who's like, she kind of takes care of him on a sort of very basic level, but she locks all the doors in her house when she goes out, because she doesn't basically trust him or want him.
She doesn't trust him. She views him with distaste. She finds him distasteful. And that's the crux of everything for poor Owen, is that people find him distasteful. So what's actually happened when he loses his job at the college is 2 girls have accused him of being inappropriate at the Christmas disco by flicking sweat off his forehead. And I was talking about this with someone else the other day, and that's the thing. It's just like, if somebody different had behaved the same way as Owen at the Christmas party, no one would have complained. But they complained because it's him. So it's not his behaviour so much that they're complaining about, it's the way they feel about him, because he engenders this sense of distaste in people, not just in women as well. Even his solicitor, who he has to employ a solicitor for various reasons, without spoilers, even he doesn't like being around Owen, and he finds him uncomfortable to be near. So that's his load. That's what Owen has to wake up and deal with every single day, and it's just so sad. And I know that must be the case for real people, and that's why I wanted to write about him, because I wanted to know what it would feel like to be viewed that way by people who don't know you.
Well, it was brilliantly done. And the other thing that struck me about having read a few of your sort of recent books, not back to back, but kind of close together, is you have an extraordinary sympathy for young people. That seems to be a recurring theme in your books, that they, you inhabit the teenage mind a lot and really sympathetically. Is that, I don't know, do you think, is that fair to say it's a recurring theme? Is it something that you keep coming back to?
Definitely a recurring theme, absolutely. So my first few novels were romantic comedies, So there were no children or teenagers in those books. And then I started writing family dramas. I moved away from the romantic comedies and started writing more seriously themed family dramas. And because I had young children at the time, I would include, there would be some young children sort of knocking around the edges of the story, but they were never really central to the drama. And then I think the first time I wrote about teenagers properly was in The Third Wife, which was about a man who's clearly been married 3 times, and he has a couple of teenage children as well. And ever since then, every single book I've written has had at least one lead protagonist, teenage protagonist. And yeah, I don't do it. And yes, in fact, the book I'm writing at the moment, again, it started off with 2 characters, a young grandmother of 39 and a young head teacher's wife of 31, and it was only going to be about them. And then I found myself writing about the young grandmother's teenage daughter. I couldn't help myself. So now I'm writing, not only have I brought her into the story fully, but she's having a full-on lesbian love affair with another teenage girl, and I've gone full-blown teenage with it.
Teenage hormones.
Yeah, I love writing. I love teenagers. You know, I had my children 13 and 17 years ago, and obviously I adore them. I've never enjoyed parenting as much as I've enjoyed parenting since they became teenagers. I love them. I love every awful thing about them. I guess it's just, my mum was the same. My mum really wasn't that fussed about us until we became teenagers. Then she just thought we were literally the most fascinating creatures that she'd ever come upon, and was just in awe of us and just thought we were incredible just purely because we were teenagers. So yeah, it must be something in my genes. I love writing.
Well, your teenagers are very sympathetic and very fascinating. The other theme, which I think has not so much, the last couple of books definitely have been very much London books, and they've been about London houses and London neighbourhoods and the particular qualities of certain areas of London. And this one also seems to me to be about kind of the communities that we build up for ourselves, and how, because the book begins when Kate and Rowan have moved out of their house because of a renovation, and they've moved to this area of Hampstead that looks very glossy and beautiful, but once they're in there they suddenly realise that it's actually this quite anonymous, sort of almost hostile place. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about that. What's your fascination with the kind of the topography of urban life?
Really specific. I've only written about areas close to me twice, and one of them was The Girls in the Garden, which was about the communal garden that I live on, or a fictionalized version of the communal garden that I live on, which is a very particular environment and amazing, like a crucible, a really amazing place to write about. And yeah, so The Family Upstairs was set in Chelsea, but that was a kind of a fantasy, really. Whereas this, as you say, is set in Hampstead, which is very close to where I live. And indeed, like Kate in the book, I did go and live in one of these grand Hampstead avenues while my house was being renovated. And I was so excited. This was going to be, I thought it was going to be an adventure. We had an 8-month contract on this beautiful cream apartment with cream carpets everywhere in this grand house. And I thought, I'm going to live in Hampstead, living the dream.
How grand.
And just absolutely hated it. I felt out of sorts. I felt displaced. I felt uncomfortable. And you just used the word hostile. That's exactly how I felt about even the physicality of the locale felt hostile. The way the trees moved in the wind and the shadows that they cast looked really sinister. The particular echo of people's footsteps off the paving stones just sounded really ominous. Our neighbours were nasty people. They were really horrible. I've never fallen out with neighbours before in my life until we lived in this apartment. And you didn't see, there were huge houses with electronic gates. You never saw anybody coming in or out of them. And that seemed to me a rich picking. Really wanted to explore that, and I could have made up another area. I thought, no, I'm going to actually use this specific area in which I had this specific experience. And in fact, there's a moment in the book where Kate is Googling ley lines because she can't understand why she feels so uncomfortable in this beautiful environment. And I that was something that I had done within a couple of weeks of moving into this flat, was just like, there must be some weird explanation for the way
why is everything wrong?
Yeah, and I don't know. I still to this day don't really understand. But actually, I spoke to a neighbour just after I moved home again. I said it was horrible. I hated it. And she said, yes, I had a friend who lived on that street, and I couldn't go and visit him there ever because I found it too uncomfortable. The atmosphere was really odd. Anyway, so that was something I really wanted to play with. And then I set it in January, so you've got plenty of opportunities for long shadows and foxes skulking through the streets and everything being very cold and dark and rigid. And yeah, so that was very important part of how I set the story.
Well, I'm sorry it was such a traumatic experience, but I'm very glad that it made it into the book, because it was very rewarding to read, if not to
Good. Good.
I have so many more questions I was going to ask, but we're coming up to when I think we should turn over to the audience. So I will finish up with two quick ones. You touched on this a little bit when you were talking about, your kind of your journey towards writing this book. And John's explained at the beginning, you've written 18 books. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about that. Like, what have you learned over the process? What do you do different? Is there anything you wish you could go back and tell your Ralph's Party self?
Well, yeah, I've been asked that question before, and I thought about it. And I realised that because of where I'm at now and the journey I've been on and the experiences I've had on that journey, and I'm starting off with a bestseller, which you would know is quite...
There's a pressure attached. Yeah.
There is so much pressure attached to starting your career, your debut novel being a bestseller. It's a really big deal. And when that slips away from you, how that makes you feel. And there were moments of fear when I thought, well, I'm still selling, but I feel like I'm never, ever, ever going to get back to where I was. And I'm just going to have to settle for being a sort of mid-list kind of writer. But that gave me the freedom. Becoming a mid-list writer rather than the top of the list writer meant that I could just stretch myself and do things that, had I still been selling oodles of copies of my books, my publishers might not have wanted me to do, because it would have been harder for them to put me into bookshops and what have you. So that released me in a way from thinking that I could only write romantic comedies, or I could only write family dramas. And then fate brought me into the hands of Selina Walker at my publishers in the UK, who is one of the top crime editors in the country. And she took me on before I was writing crime. So that was serendipitous beyond belief. And then it's just been this lovely gradual rebuilding of my career, which has felt really organic and really natural, and like it was always meant to be this way. So if I was to walk into a room and see 27-year-old Lisa Jewell sitting at her enormous computer, as it would have been back then, I would just walk away. I would literally just kind of tiptoe out of the room, just think, just you do what you're going to do, get on with it, because everything's going to be fine. And I wouldn't change a thing. So it's been a really lovely journey. I've had so many. I've been really, really lucky. And mainly in the people that I've worked with. I think they really do help to form the luck of a writer. I'm sure you would agree. Working with the right people.
It takes a village to make a book and all that. And you can be very lucky with some of your villagers.
Yeah.
But is it true that you wrote your first book on a bet? I hope if that's true, you went back and bought the person who forced you to do it a drink.
Oh, yes, it is entirely true. And funny you should say that, because I took her out for dinner last night, in fact. Yes, I'm staying in a hotel in central London while I do my virtual tour. And we kind of had this feeling that London might be about to sort of be semi-locked down again.
Correctly, as it turned out.
Yes, as it turned out, that was a correct feeling. So we had dinner last night. We had champagne to toast my publication and everything. So this is a woman who I first met when I was in my mid-20s, called Yasmin Boland. who basically, when I've suggested that I might one day sort of maybe could even vaguely consider the possibility that I might one day write a novel, basically sort of slapped me around the face and said, you know, don't
Get on with
it. Just get on with it and do it. And she spoke to my stomach, which is always a good place to address me, and said, I'll take you out for dinner to the restaurant of your choice if you start a novel. So I did start the novel, and that was Ralph's Party. And Yasmin is still very much a part of my life.
Well, bravo. And how lovely to bring it full circle. And I will just ask one very quick question before we hand over to John, which is, what is coming next?
So what is coming next, which I was tapping away on actually before I while I was waiting for the Zoom thing to open up, for the host to open Zoom. So I was still working on that just now. So it's my 19th novel. It's called The Night She Disappeared, kind of Ron Seal title, does what it says on the tin. And it's about like I think I mentioned earlier, a young teenage couple who have a baby. And they go to the pub for the first time since the baby was born and leave the baby with their mum. And in the pub, they meet up with a group of rich kids from the local boarding school. It's kind of like a boarding school for kids who flunk their GCSEs and their A-levels, which are the UK school exams. And it's quite, they're quite a handful, the kids from this college, and they hook up with them in the pub that night. They all end up going back to a mansion. I do like to write about a mansion, as do you, Ruth. And for a pool party, and this young couple never come back. And so there's a kind of cold casey element to it, because the story starts 2 years after they've disappeared, where someone digs something up in the grounds behind the boarding school.
Oh, okay, don't tell me anymore. That's
do you know what? It's much easier to explain than this monster.
So one of the
John, do you have any questions?
I do. And so I want to say, one of the things I love about your books, Lisa, is that, Invisible Girl is not an easy one to there's not a quick elevator pitch for it, but I kind of liken them to, like, you're putting together a puzzle and you don't have the image on the box. So you're putting all of these pieces together. And there's always this moment where, like, everything just starts to come into focus and you're like, oh, that's what's happening. And that's, like, my favorite moment, because it's in every one of those books. And you're like, this is so worth trying to figure out where you're going, because when you get there, it's totally worth the payoff every time.
Thank you. I sometimes feel that it feels the same for me writing the book as it feels for people reading the book, because I don't know what I'm doing. But
you're suddenly like, that's what it's about.
There it is. Absolutely. Exactly. Yes.
And I also wanted to say that I am totally in for this idea of 2050, the second coming of Agatha Christie, Ruth Rendell, the two of you back together. I'm so on board for this.
Yes, me too. Can't wait.
Good. So we do have some crowd questions. One of the most popular ones was from Lindsay, and she says, so not counting your two new releases for both of you, she would like to know, Ruth, which is your favorite book of Lisa's, and Lisa, what is your favorite book of Ruth's?
Ooh, I can't remember the title, but I really enjoyed the one of yours that was set in Bristol, Lisa. Is it called
Watching You? Watching You, yes.
Yeah,
that was my little Agatha Christie whodunit thing. Yes,
I think that's why I really appreciated the craftsmanship of it.
Yes, that's why you like it.
I think Invisible Girl maybe edged it, so it's difficult.
That's always what you want to hear, isn't it? For me, it was Turn of the Key. Turn of the Key was without a doubt my favourite. I mean, I love all your books so much. I mean, you are genuinely one of my favourite writers. And yeah, Turn of the Key, which. You probably got some great expression for what sort of novel it is.
I don't know. It's an epistolary novel because it's told over the course of one long letter. Yeah.
I knew she would. I knew she'd have. I remember saying to someone in an interview, and they were asking me about the multi-perspective thing that I do, and you came up, and I was saying how, and I just read Turn of the Key at that point. And I was saying, I do not know how you do that. I do not know how you can carry a whole story in one voice with only one perspective. I honestly think that's a dark art, which I cannot get my head around.
I'm in awe of the opposite. I love the way you jump heads and show things. So we'll both just appreciate each other's strengths.
Yes, It's lovely.
And then so on the flip side of that, do y'all have a favorite book of your own, and why is that one your favorite?
I have a favourite romantic comedy, which is Vincent Joy. I have a favourite family drama, which is A House We Grew Up In, and a favourite thriller. It's always the one you've just written, isn't it, Ruth?
That's your baby, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
it feels like your baby. Yes, so yeah, exactly. Although I did like Then She Was Gone as well. So how about you?
That's also a cracking book. Yeah. I don't know. I find it really difficult when people maybe because I haven't written as many, I can't kind of view them as dispassionately. I've only got 6. I probably have a soft spot for In a Dark, Dark Wood just because it was my first, and it was, I don't know, it was so many kind of dreams came true with that book that I never thought would happen. And yeah, it was a real kind of pinch me moment. So I don't know if it's my favorite book, but it was definitely, it was a fairy tale experience.
It's in your heart.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And then for both of you, what genres do you enjoy when you're reading? Do you stay away from thrillers and suspense since you're writing those, or do you kind of read everything? What are some of your favorite authors and books?
Yeah, no, I absolutely read within my own genre. I read so undiversely. I know that's not a word. I read domestic noir written by British women. That's pretty.
Hooray!
I read a lot of domestic noir written by British women. I've also read lots of amazing books written by Americans, but if you're talking about the majority of the books I read within my genre.
I do too. I find it really difficult to read anything too close when I'm kind of in the first draft, early stages of a novel. So at that point, I tend to steer away. And when I'm not reading kind of crime and thrillers, my jam is like historical, sort of really like deep historical, like Patrick O'Brien, kind of, like sort of Napoleonic wars kind of.
Wow, man books.
Yeah, real man books, the kind of thing that you give your dad for Father's Day.
Yeah.
But no, like Lisa, I mean, this is going to sound like I'm only saying it because we're on camera, and I'm not, but genuinely Lisa is one of my favourite thriller writers, and I always, jump at a chance reading a new book by her. But other books that I've really enjoyed this year, I love Erin Kelly. I think she does brilliant kind of characterization. I really enjoyed Riley Sager's. He's so clever about the way he kind of riffs off. I often find myself riffing off books and sort of telling another side to a story that I've kind of half read. And I feel like he does the same, but with film. His most recent one is a sort of riff on Rosemary's Baby, which I really enjoyed. So.
I've just thought of a book that I would highly recommend, and I'm going to mention it because it's written by an American writer, because I feel bad now that I've said that I read mainly British writers in an American bookshop. An amazing book called The Push by Ashley Ordrain, which comes out on the 21st of January. So I've
had so many people recommend that to me. So you just pushed it up my list.
Pre-order it now from your local bookshop. Have you read it, John?
I have not. What was the author's name?
Ashley Ordrain. It's called The Push, and it's a bit We Need to Talk About Kevin-y.
Oh.
So it's about a mother who gives birth to a baby girl, and that baby girl turns out to be not the sort of sugar and spice and all things nice kind of daughter that she was imagining. Yes.
I love it.
So Amy wants to know, kind of for Lisa, but we can rope you into this one too, Ruth. So she wanted to know, Lisa, when you were talking about kind of Owen and him being an incel, or incel adjacent, which I think Ruth was a perfect way to kind of describe him. Yeah. So how do you come up with those parts of your characters? And she says that there's just this other level to your characters, Lisa, where there are so many levels to them. So where do those like ideas of like, this is what this character is going to be come from?
I actually saw Owen in real life before I started writing the novel. About 6 months before I started writing the novel, I saw this guy, and he was the guy that I wanted to inhabit. He was the creepy guy that makes people feel uncomfortable. He's the guy you would think was capable of doing bad things to women in the dark. And and so then I gave birth to this fictionalized version of him and put him on the page. And like I said earlier, I just wanted, he's had a rubbish life, and many bad things have happened to him. He's in a rubbish situation, living with his aunt who doesn't care for him, and all rubbish thing has just happened to him. He's just lost his job, and that was a deliberate thing, because I wanted to know if he was going to be capable of doing the bad things in the dark. So the incel thing kind of just happened by fluke, really, as a, you know, you just have ideas as you go along, and I just thought that would be really interesting. I'd really like to see what Owen would do if he met an incel. That was really what it was. So I feel, so when I'm creating characters, I'm very much caring about what they will experience and how they'll respond to what they experience, rather than putting experiences onto them that I think will make the book more interesting or whatever. It was much more that I was curious about Owen and how he would respond to an incel.
And I think that Ruth kind of nailed it when she said, you know, obviously he's a character that you're not supposed to root for, and some of those passages from him, like, they're uncomfortable to read, but at the same time they're uncomfortable to read in a way because you want him to be able to kind of come out of this and come out on the other side. So it was really interesting to see how you were able to kind of have both of those kind of in one character. And how about you, Ruth? Where do your character inspirations come from?
I think, and I sort of sense this about Lisa's characters too, so maybe she'll tell me whether this is right or not, but I think I write because I want to understand people, and I keep trying to write monsters, and then they show me their humanity, and I start to understand them and understand why they're like that. And I think that's why I write, and it's why I create characters, because I want to understand what makes people tick, how people would get into this situation. But it does mean that I find it very difficult to write real stone cold baddies, because I feel like I don't understand those people.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it is. It is actually really hard when you're inhabiting someone on the page for all those months and months and months, not to find the humanity in them. It's almost impossible, and that's part of the fun, isn't it? When they show themselves to you like that. Yeah.
And Ruth, you mentioned this briefly. You said that you kind of, as you're plotting, you sort of have a general idea where things are going. But Lisa, I don't know if you mentioned that. Do you know the ending of a book when you started, or do you discover it as you go?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I have no idea. So I didn't know. I didn't know. I just, as I said earlier, I didn't know that Sapphire was going to be in the book. I didn't know that she was going to go missing until she went missing, and I had no idea where she'd gone, or if she was dead or alive, until I got to the point in the writing process where I needed to find answers. And what I do a lot, and this is something I've realised about the way I write, is I don't go back and change what I've written to fit in with what's happened subsequently, and make what happens in the future fit in with what happened in the past, which is like real life. Because you can't change the past; it's there. So I use it's always there. And I don't know if you find this, Ruth, that you're constantly surprised by what you find inside what you've already written. That's actually an incredible key to something, or the answer to a conundrum, and it was already there, and you wrote it and you didn't even know.
So often, you put a red scarf in chapter 1, and then suddenly it becomes the clue to the whole mystery when it was just a passing mention.
100%, yes, and red is definitely a factor in One by One. And I've gotten in Watching You, which was the book you just mentioned. There's a red tassel that falls off a boot.
Oh yes, of course, yeah.
Which again, I never, when I described the character's boots, I never for a moment thought that those boots were going to form part of the crime scene and would be one of the clues that solves the whole thing. So there, you have to kind of have a faith in yourself. You have to have faith in what you've put on the page. I mean, how much do you go back and change stuff to fit in with?
I very rarely change anything. I do occasionally go back and discover stuff that I didn't that wasn't originally, that was there, but I hadn't put it on the page. I don't think I've ever, you know, made someone do something different, but I've sometimes gone back and realized that something was true and I didn't make it explicit in an earlier chapter, and that is why it has turned out the way it has. So I do
totally
go back
relate to that.
But it's
I
not
totally relate to that, but it's not changing history. You're more flagging up things that are helpful to explain what happens subsequently.
So sort of going along with that, Lindsay wants to know for both of you, what do you do when you get writer's block?
I don't get writer's block. You get writer's block, Ruth? Well, no, writer's block is an actual condition. Which a writer who has previously written whatever, 500 words a day, 1,000 words a day, a book a year, a book every 2 years, a book every 5, whatever their thing is, no longer can do that. And they literally stop writing, which is not the same as having a bad week. But I don't, I mean, I've never, ever been in a situation where I've been unable to write. I'm assuming neither of you, Ruth.
No, I was going to say the same thing. I think there are two completely different things that people talk about when they talk about writer's block. And one is basically you're not sure what happens in the next scene. And that happens to me a lot. And you go and you take a walk, or you force yourself to write it, because sometimes you know what's happening and you just don't want to write it. And that's surprisingly a lot. And when you sit down and you force yourself to do it, the scene is there, but you just didn't have the courage to tackle it. But the other kind, which I think does exist and is much, much rarer, is what Lisa was talking about, which is, I think it's actually a kind of depression, and it manifests very much like depression. And I know several writers who've suffered it, and it's absolutely debilitating, and thank God I never have. But the closest I've come to appreciating what it must have been like is during lockdown, when for the first time, I wasn't writing because I was between books. I finished a book right before lockdown and I was editing it. And I didn't have a book in my head to start. And I just didn't want to write. And that's never happened to me before. I've never not had an idea that's kind of been burning to get out. And that was really weird, but it wasn't writer's block. It was
and I would imagine you knew that you weren't alone, because we all chat to other
we're all on
writers
Twitter going, oh my God, who can write when the world's falling apart?
So you knew that it wasn't like all the other writers were sitting tapping away nonchalantly on their keyboards and you were having a crisis. It was a mass crisis.
No, exactly.
All writers unable to write at the same time.
And if I'd had a deadline, I would have written through it, but you know, I didn't have a pressing deadline for once. Bizarrely, my books had been getting later and later because each time I was sort of taking slightly more than a year to deliver, and so every book was getting tighter and tighter. And so I said to my agent this time last year, I want to take some time off and have the next, like, you know, to have a year where I'm not kind of chasing a deadline. And then it turned out to be lockdown, so what a great year to give myself a break.
Best laid plans.
Well, no, in a way it was great, because I just kept thinking, thank God I'm not racing to deliver a book. The whole process even worse. But
Michelle wants to know, for either of you, are there any other genres that you haven't tackled that you'd like to at some point?
No, is my answer to that. No, I've done romantic comedies, I've done family dramas, I even did a historical novel by accident, and I think any development now in the types of books I write will be very much within the genre. So yeah, I might do like a haunted house or something, but it would still be I might not, I'm just saying.
But, do it.
But no, I'm here now.
You can't see yourself writing.
I'll always be at Murder by the Book every year.
You're not going to write a space opera or something.
No. Hey, even if you write a space opera, you can come. We will sell your space opera at Murder by the Book. I promise.
Oh,
How about
I
you?
would love to write historical. Every book, I think maybe this is the book that I could get like a historical element in, but I've never, like, the ideas that have come to me have not been quite right for historical. But I love research, and on the books where I've had to do a lot of research, they've often been the most rewarding in terms of, you know, throwing up weird little ideas that you can like put in. And so I think writing historical would be fun in that sense. But I think, like Lisa, I think it would still be a historical novel with a dark heart and a crime and a whoddunit element. I can't really imagine stepping away from that.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically, so that Murder by the Book will still let me in.
Same. You can, whatever you write, we will still, you know, we have a little bit of a fantasy section where we've got some, like, you know, epic fantasy, urban fantasy. So like if it's an author that we like and it's something we love, whether it's mystery or not, you're welcome, I promise.
Thank you, John.
Of course. So just a couple more before we head out. Parker wants to know, for both of you, what does your writing routine look like? Let's start with Lisa.
So my writing routine, obviously I've been writing for 25 years now, so it's changed a lot over the years, but currently, putting lockdown to one side, I get all my to-do list done in the morning. So I do my email, my housework, anything that is not writing that I feel needs to be done that day. I go to the shops, I walk the dog, blah blah, etc. And then the minute that's all done, then I start writing. I either write at the kitchen table or I write in a coffee shop, and I write 1,000 words and then I stop.
That's so organised. Okay, mine is not that. Mine is sort of, it's organised in terms of time, but I don't have a word target. So I write, my kids are still school age, so I kind of write bookended by the school day of getting them off, and then, you know, they come home and the house is not a quiet, peaceful place anymore. So that's my kind of my office hours, and I sit down at the desk after they've gone, and I always have about an hour of procrastination where I, you know, look at social media or do my emails, and I seem to kind of need that to sort of ease myself into the idea of I'm a writer and I can do this, and I've got to get it out of the way. And then, yeah, I sit down and write until I stop wanting to write, and that could be 1,000 words, it could be 7,000 words. I think that was the best I've ever done in one day. Yeah. It could be I delete 500 words, and sometimes I think that's a better day's work if you get rid of a scene that's not working.
If it's clogging it up, yes, it's definitely a better day's work.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I don't find word counts very helpful because I think it makes me focus on the wrong metric. I just try to make sure I've moved the story on.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it doesn't sound dissimilar to me, actually, Ruth. I think your day sounds quite similar to mine. And I did forget the social media as well. That's another thing I do in the mornings before I start work.
I love that you guys both do, you know, there's definitely something similar between what you guys both do with your books, but I love that you both come from it, aside from kind of the writing routine, from like completely different angles. It's always interesting to hear how, like, the thing with like one perspective versus two and how that works with people. So Lisa, we heard you tell us a little bit about your next project. Ruth, can you tell us what you've got coming up next?
Well, mine's at too early a stage at the moment. So I really didn't do anything. And now the cogs are just kind of starting to turn again, but it's too early days. I can't let it out in public. So.
Oh, Ruth.
But fair enough.
Don't worry, there will be another book and it will be another mystery.
Perfect. So thank you guys so much for joining us this afternoon. For anybody that came in late, as I mentioned, give us a couple of days and we will get this uploaded to YouTube. And within the next couple of days, we will send out a YouTube link to everybody so that way you can watch it. And then it'll be basically kind of a private link for y'all for a couple of weeks. And then once Lisa is kind of done promoting everything, we'll put it out so everybody else can watch it. Wanted to mention, if you have not picked up copies of Invisible Girl, we have signed copies in stock. We also have copies of 1 by 1 by Ruth Ware, and we have signed book plates to go with those. Before you go, I wanted to extend a huge thank you both to Lisa, Jewell, and Ruth Ware, but also to Ariel at Simon & Schuster and Atria Books, who has been so wonderful helping us get this set up. As y'all mentioned, it kind of takes a village for these books to kind of get out in the world, and we appreciate the work that publicists do to help us be able to do amazing stuff like this and be able to host and take part in these conversations. So thank you everybody for joining us. Lisa, Ruth, it was wonderful to see both of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you for having us. And thank you, Ruth, for all the great questions and for being such a brilliant interviewer. It was wonderful. And I can't wait to have the opportunity to do the same for you, for your next book.
My pleasure. Invisible Girl gave me so much to talk about that I could have gone on for another hour, but my voice is probably given out.
Thank you.
Care. I hope you both feel better. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you soon.
Good night, everybody.
Night, everybody.